Well, but look, if we're in a time of war and we're spending money on the war and spending to defend the homeland, I would
understand
suspect
that.
even you agree that we should increase
I understand
the debt ceiling.
the war wasn't anticipated. At the time, he said he was going to govern as a fiscal conservative, but he did increase the national debt by $2 trillion. Put that aside. You have watched many states of the union and maybe even had a little hand in what some presidents have said, like the last one. What did you think of President Obama the other night? Was this even an effort to move to the middle, or was this just the same old guy using a few different words?
Well, it was a rhetorical flourish towards the middle. I mean, in fact, you could have closed your eyes and heard Ronald Reagan talking about the promise of America and how our people can outcompete any worker anywhere in the world, how America has got a bright future. But if you look at the substance of it, it was a dreadful missed opportunity. He said, well, I appointed this bipartisan debt commission to look into ways to reform and save Social Security and Medicare, and they had some interesting suggestions, and I hope you'll look at them. Basically no presidential leadership.
Right.
I've ballooned the spending by 25%, 84% if you include the stimulus, so let's freeze it for the next 5 years, which, we can't, freeze is inadequate. We got to cut it now. He has raised it by so much and put our country in such a perilous place that we need to cut it. So no, I thought the speech, the more I look at the speech and the more I read the speech, the more dreadful it becomes. The future of America is dependent upon three things. Did you know this, Judge? It's dependent upon high-speed rail, high-speed internet, and, quote, countless green jobs. I mean, his policies are going to create, quote, countless green jobs, so many we can't even add them up. I mean, this was, laughable.
Does the fact that much of what he proposed is not authorized by the Constitution trouble you, or as the practical political advisor that you are, would you advise a president to do what he can get away with?
Well, no, you need to be governed by what the Constitution allows. And look, some of these things, look, the market is better able to provide high-speed internet than is the government.
Absolutely.
Let the markets do it. I mean, we got so many telecommunications companies out there that would love to build more of the internet structure if only they were certain of the environment in which the government was going to make them operate. High-speed rail, if it made sense, private industry would be taking the lead. And now it might be that the government would have to help them with the ability to carve a route out of another country.
Switching gears a little bit,
it was an amazing one.
Even though under your guidance of President Bush, the debt ceiling was raised at least $2 trillion. Should the debt ceiling go up again, or is there a point beyond which we just have to stop borrowing more money? What would you advise Republicans to do next week? To vote yes or no on raising the debt ceiling?
I think Rand Paul had the right formulation, which is, look, there is a way to raise the debt ceiling in a way that puts us on a path to lower the debt ceiling. That is to say, get something in return for it. Now, President Obama and Senator Reid have lost their moral authority to lecture us on the necessity of passing a debt ceiling increase. They voted against it in 2006 because they were opposed to the Iraq War. And they got up, both of them, and fulminated against it. So they've lost their moral authority. But I think the Republicans in the Congress have got it right. We're going to get something out of this that is going to help put the country on a path to reducing the size of government. In fact, you know what? We ought to take a moment to celebrate. I was working the numbers out the other day. The Republicans are aiming to get $100 billion cut out of the budget. Do you know how much money they cut out of President Obama's budget when they deep-sixed the omnibus spending bill during the lame duck session?
How much?
$42 billion in this year's budget. In this year's budget. So, we're already, they want to get $100 billion. They could certainly find $60 billion more.
I can't be on the same page with you. I think the only, this because you've been in the government, the only thing the government understands is when the law prevents it from borrowing more money. Otherwise, a promise not to borrow more money and a promise to keep spending down is not worth the paper that it's not put on.
I don't want promises. I think to trust but verify. We need to have an agreement that can be executed, and the way that you enforce that agreement is you only raise the debt ceiling for a small period of time in a small increment. Look, they've actually got until July, August, September, even October before they hit the debt ceiling. And what you do is you keep using the power of that vote, only giving them an incremental increase for a brief period of time in order to enforce the spending side of it. Otherwise, look,
gotta go.
I don't want them to go in and all right.
Thanks for joining us. Up next, Fox News' Kirsten Powers on the biggest brouhaha in Washington. And it's not between the Republicans and the president. It's the president and his own party. Next. The president in his State of the Union address appeared to make a giant leap toward the center. Now, I don't think his new business-friendly approach is genuine, certainly not while his policies make him the biggest federal regulator since FDR. Regardless, many on the left are furious at the president for supposedly caving to Republicans. Here to straighten out all of this mess is my friend and colleague, Fox News contributor Kirsten Powers. Kirsten, it's a pleasure. Welcome to Freedom
So nice
Watch.
to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, what did you think of the speech the other night? Did the president move to the center? Did he want us to think he moved to the center? Did he move at all? Did he move just enough to irritate his base on the left? How do you see it?
Well, first of all, the base has been irritated with him for a long time. So I don't think there was anything particularly in the speech that was a signal that he was moving away from them. He's been making them angry on a whole score of things. I have to be honest, I didn't see the speech as being particularly centrist. I saw it as just being sort of common sense and more aspirational about the future of the country. And so sort of rhetorically, he was talking about different things, and he was clearly not talking about healthcare anymore and moving on to the things that he should have been focused on in the first place, which was the economy, the future of the country. How are we going to be more competitive? How are we going to, catch up and ultimately dominate the other countries in terms of, our economy? So I thought it was just a pretty straightforward speech that are things that Obama's always really believed in. He just hasn't really talked about a lot.
From the point of view of Democrats, did the president make a mistake when he championed the extension of the Bush-era tax rates shortly after the November election? I know why you're laughing, but I have to ask you that question.
It was from a liberal perspective, it was horrific. It was really one of the worst things that he could do.
Right. Jerry Nadler, who's a liberal Democrat that represents Manhattan, on the set, told me the other day, it was the biggest disappointment he's ever endured from a Democratic president. Do members of the left, do liberals in the party actually believe that?
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. I mean, and I've had a lot of disappointments with him, certainly, particularly on foreign policy. But, this certainly was the biggest of them all, because I really don't believe that the tax cuts are stimulative at the rate. I think taxes have to be much higher in order for this slight decrease to really be stimulative. And it was adding so much to the deficit to a group of people who are frankly doing just fine. So I think that, yes, it was absolutely a huge disappointment.
You and I are against the use of drones to kill people where wars haven't been declared. You and I are against secret sites where people are kept and coerced to say things. You and I are against Gitmo. You and I are against foreign wars of opportunism and using the military for nation building. Didn't you think that President Obama was going to stop all of that? It's the same as it was under President Bush.
Well, that's why I said, I've been disappointed with him for a long time, and I think the drone attacks in particular, they've tripled under Obama. 1 in 4 people who are killed by them are civilians. They're doing nothing in terms of really fighting terrorism. Osama bin Laden's never even been targeted by one. It's just, I think it's immoral also.
Will there be, last question, Kirsten.
Yeah.
Will the frustration that you've just articulated bear the fruit of someone to oppose his presidency in the primaries a year from now?
I doubt it. I mean, not a serious person. I think that he is pretty strong, and despite all of my complaints about him, and I think the complaints of people on the left, he's still better than the alternative, at least to the alternatives that we're seeing on the Republican side. So it would.
All right. We'll talk about those alternatives next time you're on. Kirsten Powers, it's a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. And now a few items from our Freedom File. The Lancaster, Pennsylvania School District segregated homerooms at McCaskey East High School by race and gender, with each class led by a person of the same race and gender. This flawed, medieval-sounding plan was inspired by research showing that students who have a strong mentor perform better in school. To this school board, a strong mentor must be of the same gender and the same race as the students. By propagating this absurd idea, this government-run school is actually reinforcing racialism while violating the constitutional concept of equal protection under the law. Let's make this clear. The Constitution does not permit the government, any government, to make decisions based on race, period. Border Patrol agent Brian Gonzalez was fired for casually telling his colleagues that drug legalization would help stem the flow of drug violence along the Mexican border. After Agent Gonzalez made his comments, he received a letter from the Border Patrol claiming that his statements were, quote, contrary to the core characteristics of Border Patrol agents, which are patriotism, dedication, and esprit de corps. Is the Border Patrol completely blind to reality? The drug war itself is the cause of Mexican drug cartel violence at the border. Furthermore, expressing a valid and reasonable opinion is the very definition of a patriotic and dedicated American. Mr. Gonzalez should be praised for using his firsthand experience to attempt to end America's pointless and violent drug war. And he should get his job back. There should be more agents like him. Kelly Williams Bolar of Akron, Ohio, was put in jail for 9 days after she was convicted of the felony of records tampering for the awful crime of, get this, sending her son to a better school than what the local government offered. She used her father's address on a school registration form to establish residency in a school district in which she and her son did not live. All right, this mother broke the law, but who would not be sympathetic to a mother's plight to do what's best for her child? This case highlights the great injustice that the government perpetuates in American education today. It takes your tax dollars, hires incompetent teachers, gives them jobs for life, and then dictates to you where your children must go to school. Freedom means choices, and the government keeps taking away choices. The government is no friend of freedom, and we will have more on this story tomorrow. The smartest money move for America? Cut education spending. Next. Cutting government spending is easy to talk about, but not so easy to do. Everyone has a sacred cow. Education, for example, is a popular one. But consider that since 1970, when the feds began getting involved in educational funding, spending has gone from an inflation-adjusted $31 billion to $83 billion. My next guest says that's money down the drain. Joining me now is Neil McCluskey from the Cato Institute. Neil, it's a pleasure. Welcome here.
Thanks for having me.
Does the federal government have any business? Let's just put aside the constitutional argument until we get to it if we have time. Does the federal government have any business running local schools, funding local schools, or telling local boards of education how to run their schools?
Well, I mean, absolutely not. If we'll set the Constitution aside, like you said. We just then need to look at what have we gotten for all the money that the federal government has spent, and you just gave the figures.
Right.
So if you put a graph, the spending goes up like Mount Everest. If you look at achievement, especially for 17-year-olds who are kind of the final products of our schools,
right,
it's like Death Valley. It's absolutely flat. So we've gotten no return for the quote-unquote investment that the federal government has put in with our taxpayer dollars into schools.
When the federal government puts its $83 billion into schools, does that actually go into things like buying textbooks or getting better athletic equipment for student athletes? Or does it go to huge bloated bureaucracies and support staff, which instead sort of perpetuate the lobbying for all this money?
Well, I'd say if you really want to nail it down, it would be almost impossible because the federal government doesn't know where all the dollars are going. But in the aggregate, by far, the biggest cost in education is personnel costs. All the teachers, the administrators, the teaching assistant staff. And if you look at just employment, it's pretty much doubled compared to the number of kids who are in the schools. So you have way more teachers and administrators and other apparatchiks than you have kids. And again, you'd say, well, that might be okay if we saw an improvement in academic achievement, but we have seen none.
What did No Child Left Behind accomplish other than wasting money and frustrating the daylights out of local school administrators?